Welcome to the Global News Podcast. I'm Keith Adams, and I'm joined by our White House correspondent in Washington, Bernd de Boosman. Now, Bernd, there are questions now being asked about the security at the event, and I know there are reports that the shooter was actually staying there. It's not your first time attending a White House correspondent dinner. What are we hearing?
Well, in retrospect, I think a lot of questions will be asked about how much the hotel was secured. When I got to the hotel on Saturday night, I got there quite early to have a drink with some friends that I knew were going to be at the dinner. When I walked in, I did think it was quite strange that there were hotel guests clearly not going to the dinner. I mean, everyone going to the dinner was wearing tuxedos and evening gowns. They were just kind of sitting in the lobby, mingling or walking around the bar area, which is in the lobby, very close to members of Congress or really quite prominent journalists that do kind of face at least online threats, and that struck me as a little odd, but I didn't think much of it. And then I think most importantly, there are many side parties at the hotel ahead of the main reception. None of those seem to have much security at all, and at no point was I asked to show any form of ID. I briefly showed my ticket to get in from the street. I know of friends who walked into parties to which they were not invited, and there was no metal detector until one kind of descended much further into the party just before the reception area, where there was kind of an hour worth of open bar and drinks. And that's where apparently this incident took place, but many questions will be asked about how exactly this took place and if the perimeter around the ballroom was secure, even if the ballroom itself might have been secure.
Let's broaden this out a bit more and talk about, politically motivated crime and violence in the United States. That's the third assassination attempt, I think, on Trump. And then we've had other violent incidents, including the Charlie Kirk assassination. What's going on, Bernd?
Well, that's something that there's been growing concern about even over the course of years, that there's been more and more acts of political violence. I was actually at the shooting in Butler, Pennsylvania as well during the Trump campaign. And to me, the feeling immediately after and the conversations that were had immediately after, I mean, they were very, very similar in my mind. And I think the consensus among Americans is that as society here is becoming more polarized, these incidents seem to be on the rise. At one point, several years ago, the FBI kind of warned very specifically that this was on the rise and there was more danger of violence or even domestic terrorism than had been the case in the past. And, but even those conversations are themselves quite polarizing. Both sides of the political spectrum kind of blame the other for an increase in political violence. Many Democrats say, for example, that the rhetoric from the Trump administration is driving people to violence. The Trump administration and President Trump himself, very frequently, I should add, blame the left for rhetoric used about the administration driving people to act against the administration. So it's an issue in which no one can really agree what the cause of the problem is, even if people broadly are concerned that there is, in fact, a problem.
Yeah, and, if we're saying that the source of this is polarization, the political polarization, why is that, Bernd? Why are things being stretched? Why are the two sides so far apart?
Over time, I think we saw both sides of the political spectrum kind of drift even further apart to the right and to the left, and really can't actually find much to agree on with regards to anything, whether it be foreign policy, domestic policy, how one deals with crime and what's causing it. The center of United States politics, at least in my view and in the view of I think many Americans, has kind of fallen away, and now there's two sides that are kind of almost polar opposites on policy issues, and often using language that is really quite aggressive and quite harsh about their counterpart. There seems to be very few people kind of aiming to like reach across the aisle, as they say in Congress, and kind of bridge that divide to actually sit down and find something that they agree upon or something that they feel that they can work on together. It's kind of become a one side versus the other, and the one side thinking it needs to resist the other. And I think that's all amplified on X or Instagram, Facebook, all these platforms. I think people, consume a lot of content that isn't necessarily representative of the vast majority of Americans who don't want this to happen, but is really quite aggressive in character and in tone.
So it seems that you need someone to reach across and find the middle ground here. Is no one trying to do that?
Well, as is often the case after these sorts of shootings, we immediately saw statements from prominent Americans and prominent members of the kind of political establishment calling for the temperature to be lowered, but there doesn't actually seem to be anyone working to lower the temperature. I thought it was notable that in the press briefing that President Trump did just about 2 hours after the shooting, it didn't become necessarily a huge blame game, and he at the time seemed to be kind of trying to lower the temperature himself. But then again, he gave an interview to 60 Minutes the following day, and he was much less so trying to bring down the temperature. I think it's one of those situations that many Americans will think is very unfortunate, that in a few days' time, it's very possible we'll be back to a situation in which both sides of the U.S. political divide are kind of blaming each other for what happened. This is I saw the same thing after Butler. There was calls to bring everyone together, and then that didn't last very, very long at all.
And I suppose with every act of violence, even if it seems outrageous, in a sense, that political violence becomes kind of normalized.
It's interesting. That's a conversation I had with many people the morning after the shooting on Saturday. Once everything had settled and people had stopped working, there was kind of a sense that, this has all become quite normal. Many of the reporters that were there had also been in Butler. Many others had covered school shootings or other acts of mass violence that have taken place in this country. And it's almost become kind of a routine to a certain extent. I mean, every few weeks there seems to be some act of violence, political or otherwise. I think the only real difference in this incident was that the attempted incident was outside a room holding the president, cabinet members, and hundreds of the most prominent journalists in the country. So that the story kind of came to them rather than them going to the story. But this happens all the time, and I think many Americans will be wondering why this became so normalized.
Thanks, Bernd. That was Bernd Debusman, our White House correspondent there in Washington. And if you want to hear more from the Global News podcast, just click the link below. Thanks for joining us.